On Christmas Eve, Caleb Hawkins sat alone at a table set for one. Same plate, same fork, same silence that had swallowed him whole for 6 long winters. Only Coda, his battle-scarred German shepherd, lay at his boots, guarding a man who feared memories far more than the cold. Then came the knock. 3 sharp blows that sliced through the Christmas blizzard like a warning from heaven. Caleb didn't react. Not until Coda rose, ears pricked, staring at the door as if he sensed something no man could. The knock came again, followed by a child's cry, thin, breaking, carried by the storm. Caleb's hand moved to the door before he even realized he'd stood up. What he found on his porch that Christmas Eve would shatter every wall he thought unbreakable. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. On Christmas Eve, a brutal winter storm swallowed the Montana mountains in white silence. Sergeant Caleb Hawkins had lived through many winters. Some fought in deserts half a world away. Others endured in the cavernous quiet of his own heart, but none felt as hollow as this one. He stood in the dim cabin lit only by a small wood stove, its orange glow flickering across the sharp planes of his face. At 36, Caleb looked older than his years. His once youthful features carved by loss, his jaw strong but shadowed with a perpetual stubble. His storm-gray eyes heavy with a kind of fatigue no sleep could cure. His black hair, cut short in the utilitarian style of Marines, was dusted with flakes of snow he hadn't bothered to brush away after returning from his evening patrol around the property. He wore the winter field uniform of a U.S. Marine out of habit more than necessity. An olive-green jacket with the insignia still faintly visible. Marpad camouflage pants tucked into worn-tin boots and black gloves hanging from his belt. He didn't need the uniform anymore. He just didn't know who he was without it. The cabin was small, built by Caleb's grandfather, a place meant for hunters and holiday weekends. Yet, it had become a refuge for a man running from ghosts. On a hook by the door hung a faded photograph of a woman with warm blue eyes and 2 young boys with matching grins. Ellelaner Samuel William. His entire world once. The reason he had fought. The reason he had survived until the day he came home to nothing but sirens in a covered stretcher. Sometimes Caleb wondered if he had died with them, and only his body kept moving. Only one living creature remained tethered to him. Coda, a 4-year-old male German shepherd with thick amber fur, strong shoulders, and a sharp intelligence in his dark eyes. Coda had been a military K-9 assigned to Caleb during his final deployment. A dog trained to read danger, scent explosives, and understand the emotional fractures in a man better than most humans. After the incident overseas that nearly killed both of them, Coda was retired early, deemed unsuitable for further service because of physical scarring and heightened protectiveness. Caleb adopted him without hesitation. They were 2 broken soldiers who understood each other in silence. That night, Caleb had set a simple dinner on the table, a tin of soup, a slice of bread, and a plate he had placed out of habit for people no longer here. It was Christmas Eve, but to him it was just another date on a calendar he'd barely touched. As he sat down, the storm outside thickened, wind howling like something ancient and wounded. Coda lay near the stove, eyes half closed but ears alert. Caleb exhaled long and tired, rubbing the scar along his left wrist, the one place shrapnel had left visible. The ache arrived with the cold every year, a reminder. Then 3 sharp knocks cracked through the storm. Knock, knock, knock. Coda's head shot up instantly, ears perked, body tensing. Caleb froze, heart thudding in a way that was both instinctual and haunted. People didn't come here, especially not in a blizzard, especially not at night. Coda moved first, stepping toward the door with a low rumble vibrating through his chest. Caleb swallowed hard, unsure whether it was danger or something worse, the unknown. He reached the door slowly, every muscle taut from old habits carved by combat. When he opened it, a blast of freezing wind punched into the cabin, scattering snow across the floor. But it wasn't the cold that stunned him. It was the sight on his doorstep. A woman stood there, shoulders hunched forward. Protectively, her long brown hair plastered to her cheeks by wet snow, her lips trembling from cold and exhaustion. She looked around 30, but hardship had carved fine lines of worry around her eyes. Her skin was pale beneath the cold, and her breath came in fast, panicked bursts. She wore a heavy winter coat that was soaked through, the fabric stiff with frozen edges. In her arms, she held a tiny infant bundled in a thin blanket. The baby's face was frighteningly pale, lips nearing blue. Behind her stood 2 children. One was a girl around 6, with chestnut hair tangled from wind and eyes much too old for her age. Narrowed in determination, though her little body shook from cold. She clung tightly to her mother's coat. Beside her, another girl, 3 years old at most, swayed unsteadily, her small hands red and raw from the icy air, her nose dripping, tears frozen on her cheeks. The storm raged behind them, whipping the snow sideways like white knives. The woman opened her mouth, but only a strained whisper escaped. "Please, please help us." Caleb's throat tightened. He had seen refugees like this before, families fleeing in the night from war zones, carrying only fear and hope. The memory hit him so hard, he had to grip the door knob to steady himself. He forced his voice into something steady. "Come inside. Hurry." But the woman shook her head, stepping back slightly, as if afraid her presence would be a burden. "We just need somewhere warm for a moment. Our car." She pointed vaguely into the storm. "It broke down. I didn't know where else to go. I'm sorry to bother you." Caleb looked past her and spotted the faint silhouette of an old SUV half buried in drifting snow on the roadside. Its headlights were dimming, battery nearly dead. Panic flickered across the woman's face, and it tightened something deep inside him. He stepped aside, voice firmer. "Get in, all of you." Still, the woman hesitated, glancing at his uniform jacket at the rugged stranger in the doorway. Her fear wasn't irrational. Men had not been kind to her. That much he could see in her guarded posture. Then something unexpected happened. Coda, who had stood beside Caleb like a sentinel, slowly approached the smallest child. The German shepherd lowered his head, sniffed the baby's blanket, then gently nudged the infant's little hand with his nose. The baby gave a weak whimper. Coda then turned to the 3-year-old, softly licking her frost-bitten knuckles. The toddler blinked and hiccuped, momentarily distracted from her shivering. The 6-year-old tightened her grip on her mother, but her expression softened at the dog's gentle behavior. The woman stared in disbelief, then in relief. Something in Coda's calm confidence broke through her fear. Caleb saw the shift happen. He opened the door wider and said quietly but definitively, "No one's dying out there tonight. Come inside." The woman stepped over the threshold first, cradling the infant closer. The 6-year-old followed, her gaze darting around, taking in every detail with wary intelligence. The toddler stumbled and last, nearly slipping on the wooden step, and Coda moved behind her like a furry guardian, ensuring she didn't fall. Caleb closed the door behind them, locking out the storm. Warmth washed over them instantly. The toddler gasped in relief, her face scrunching as the blood returned to her cheeks. The infant whimpered weakly, its tiny fingers curling and uncurling as if waking from a cold slumber. The woman let out a shuddering breath and leaned briefly against the wall, exhaustion overtaking her. Caleb gently reached for the baby. "Let me see her." The woman hesitated, but the desperation in her eyes overcame her caution. She handed the infant to him. The baby was light, far too light, her skin chilled, her breathing shallow. Caleb felt a surge of protectiveness, so sudden it almost hurt. Memories of holding Samuel as a baby stabbed through him. He swallowed hard and wrapped the infant in a wool blanket, bringing her closer to the stove. Coda pressed against his leg, concerned. "What's your name?" Caleb asked without looking away from the baby. "Hannah," the woman whispered. "My girls are Clara. She's 6. Maggie is 3. And this little one is Lily. She's only 9 months." Caleb nodded, gently rocking the infant. "I'm Caleb. This is your safe here." Hannah's legs nearly gave out at the word safe. She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking as she tried to contain her sobs. Clara immediately wrapped her arms around her mother, whispering, "Mama, it's okay. We made it." Maggie, still trembling, waddled toward Coda and touched his fur. The dog sat beside her, steady and warm. Caleb watched all of it with a quiet ache in his chest. He didn't understand why fate had brought them to his doorstep on this night of all nights. But as he studied the fragile baby in his arms and the terrified strength in Hannah's eyes, something inside him shifted. A long frozen part of his soul cracked like ice underweight. And then from outside the cabin, something moved in the storm. Something that made Coda suddenly lift his head, ears sharp, body going still. Inside the small cabin, the heat from the wood stove spread slowly like a hesitant blessing, pushing back the icy grip that clung to the 3 children huddled on Caleb's worn sofa. The storm still screamed against the walls. But in here, the air was shifting warmer, softer. Cautiously hopeful, Coda sat alert beside the sofa, his amber coat catching the glow of the flames, his dark eyes moving between each child as if counting them, memorizing them, claiming responsibility for their survival. Caleb moved with a purposeful steadiness, though an old ache pressed behind his ribs. He filled a pot with milk, warmed it on the stove, then poured the steaming liquid into mismatched mugs he hadn't touched in years. The children weren't picky. Their small hands trembled as they grasped the cups. Clara with controlled discipline, Maggie with desperate eagerness, and baby Lily with weak, curling fingers as Hannah gently guided the mug to her lips. The sound Lily made, a faint raspy whimper, sent a jolt of protective fear straight through Caleb's chest. Hannah watched him quietly, exhaustion pulling at her expression. Without the snow plastering her hair flat, he could see the natural softness of her waves. The way strands of chestnut brown framed her pale face. Her cheeks were hollow from hunger and worry. But her eyes, hazel touched with gold, held a fierce, immovable determination that reminded him painfully of Ella Laner. Women who had survived too much shared the same unspoken fire. Sit, Caleb said gently. You all need rest. But Hannah remained standing, arms wrapped protectively around Lily, swaying slightly as if years of carrying children had made the motion instinctive. I will in a moment, she murmured, watching the girls sip their milk. I just need to make sure they're really safe. Caleb understood. Safety was a fragile miracle, something you didn't trust easily once it had been taken from you. After a few minutes, he knelt beside Maggie, inspecting her little feet with careful hands. The 3-year-old had dark brown pigtails sticking out unevenly, her round cheeks still mottled from cold. She blinked at him with wide brown eyes, curious, unafraid, while Coda nudged her elbow gently, offering silent encouragement. These toes are numb, Caleb muttered, his voice tightening. You were out in that blizzard too long. Hannah's breath hitched. Is it serious? Not yet, he said, rubbing Maggie's feet between warm towels. But another hour out there, and she would have lost feeling for good. Maggie tilted her head. Are you a doctor? No, sweetheart, Caleb answered softly. Just someone who's seen too many people freeze. Clara, sitting stiffly with perfect posture beside her little sister, turned her face away. She tried to hide it, but a tear slid down her cheek. She was 6, but her eyes carried an 11-year-old sorrow, the kind carved by responsibility. Far too heavy for a small body to hold. I was supposed to help Mama, she whispered. I should have carried Maggie more. I shouldn't have let Lily get so cold. Caleb paused. The guilt in her voice cut him deeply. You did more than enough, he said firmly. You kept walking. That saved your sisters' lives. Clara didn't answer, but her little shoulders shook. Hannah set Lily down gently and moved to her eldest, kneeling despite her trembling legs. Honey, she murmured, cupping Clara's face. I couldn't have done any of it without you. You kept us together. You kept me going. Ciel then, soundlessly, her face buried in her mother's chest. Caleb looked away out of respect, a lump rising in his throat. Coda, sensing the shift, walked over and rested his head gently on Clara's knee, a soft rumble of reassurance vibrating from his chest. Only when the girls were calmer did Hannah sit beside Caleb near the stove, letting the warmth soak into her bones. She pulled Lily close again, stroking the baby's soft, dark curls, hair still damp and clinging to her forehead. Lily was small for her age, fragile, tiny hands curling into Hannah's sweater as she slept. Caleb stirred the pot of soup he'd heated, a simple vegetable broth he'd planned to eat alone. Now he ladled it into bowls and set them on the table. Eat, he said quietly. Hannah hesitated at first out of habit. Mothers always gave food to their children first until Caleb nodded toward the girls, already finishing their soup and reaching for bread. Only then did she take a single trembling bite. The way she exhaled afterward, relief mixed with disbelief, pulled something raw inside him. Minutes passed before she finally spoke. I owe you an explanation. You don't owe me anything, Caleb replied. Her eyes lifted to his, and for the first time, he saw not just fear, but the heavy dignity of someone who refused to be a burden. I do, she insisted softly. You deserve to know why we were out there and what we're running from. Caleb nodded once, silently granting permission. Hannah's voice trembled only on the first words. My husband, Daniel, he died last spring. She swallowed. Pneumonia. It happened so fast the doctors hardly had time to understand it. Caleb lowered his gaze. Death that struck without warning had its own cruelty. We had his younger brother, Victor, Hannah continued. He promised to help, promised he'd keep us safe, but instead he took everything. Her jaw clenched, not anger, but humiliation. He said the debts Daniel left behind were my fault. Said I wasn't fit to raise the girls. He took the house, the savings, even the land Daniel inherited from their grandfather. And then he told me to leave. That he didn't want charity cases living under his roof. Caleb felt heat rise in his chest, anger that surprised him with its sharpness. Coda seemed to sense it too, his ears flattening. So I left, Hannah whispered. I packed whatever we had left into Daniel's old SUV. How long were you driving? 3 days, she said. We were heading toward Idaho. I heard there might be work, a diner, maybe a motel. Her voice weakened. But when we were crossing the pass, the bottom of the car hit a rock. The axle snapped. I tried everything, but the engine died and the wind, just her breath faltered. There was no signal, no cars. The storm was getting worse. I thought if I kept the girls moving, maybe we wouldn't freeze. Caleb stood still for a moment, absorbing the weight of it, her desperation, her strength, the impossible choices she'd made. You walked 3 kilometers, he said quietly. In a blizzard. She laughed bitterly. If you can call what I was doing walking. You survived, he murmured. That's what matters. But Hannah shook her head. No. The only reason we're alive is because you opened the door. Caleb didn't answer. Couldn't. His throat felt tight. After a long silence, Hannah looked at him again directly, vulnerably. Why did you help us, Caleb? You live alone. You don't seem like a man who expects company. His jaw worked for a moment before he finally forced out the truth. Because, he said quietly, I know what it feels like to lose people, and I'm not letting that happen again. Not on my watch. Hannah inhaled sharply as if the honesty itself stung. Before either of them could speak again, Coda's head suddenly lifted, his body stiffened, gaze locked on the front door. A low growl rumbled through his chest. Caleb's muscles tensed instantly, combat instincts crackling awake. Hannah froze. Clara clutched Maggie's hand. The wind screamed outside. Then something heavy thudded against the porch. Coda growled louder. Caleb reached for the handgun he hadn't touched in months. Someone or something was outside in the storm, and they were not alone anymore. Chapter 3. The days of storm and the hearts that thawed. The storm did not ease the next morning, nor the morning after. Instead, it thickened, layering the world outside in white walls so tall they swallowed fences, treetops, and even the horizon itself. The cabin became a small island in a frozen world, a place sealed off by nature, held together by sparse heat, thin breaths, and the fragile rhythm of hope. Caleb moved through the days with disciplined efficiency, every gesture calm and precise, a habit built from years of marine life. He chopped wood, added fuel to the generator, secured loose panels, checked the snow load on the roof. Yet something in his routine had changed. He wasn't doing all this for himself anymore. He was doing it for the 4 people who had unexpectedly slipped into the hollow places of his life. Inside the cabin pulsed with a new kind of energy. Children. Maggie, with her unruly pigtails and wide brown eyes, trailed behind as though tied to him by invisible thread. Every time the German shepherd moved, she toddled after him, often clutching a piece of his fur or leaning against his side. Coda tolerated it with a patient loyalty unusual even for a trained canine. His thick amber coat brushed softly against her small shoulders as he guided her around furniture, nudged her away from the stove, or simply let her bury her hands in his fur. Baby Lily had regained enough warmth to begin smiling again, a faint dimpled curl of her lips that sparked something warm in the cabin each time it appeared. She laughed whenever entered the room, a soft, breathy giggle that made her entire tiny frame tremble with delight. Clara, the oldest at 6, had insisted on helping Caleb from the start. She followed him into the lean-to where the generator sputtered through the storm. She watched his every movement, how he tapped gauges, checked fuel lines, brushed ice from its vents. Her eyes narrowed in the same determined way her mother's did when facing hardship. Clara didn't talk much, but her presence was intentional, sharp, and thoughtful. "You don't have to help," Caleb said once, brushing snow from the generator's casing. She shrugged, wrapping her thin coat tighter. "Mama says everyone works if they can." Her voice held both responsibility and quiet pride, far too mature for a child her age. When they moved to the barn, Clara helped scatter feed for the 2 horses that came with the property, the animals. A pair of sturdy Mustangs Caleb had adopted from a rescue snorted clouds of warm air as the little girl reached up timidly to stroke their noses. "You're brave," Caleb murmured. "I'm just trying to do good," she whispered, not looking at him. Those words lingered with him for hours afterward. Hannah, meanwhile, tried to help wherever she could, though exhaustion clung to her like shadow. She washed bowls, folded blankets, and checked on the girls constantly. Even when Caleb assured her they were safe, she hovered protectively, always watching, always listening for the smallest cry. Her hair, loose now and brushed dry, fell around her shoulders in soft waves. She wore an oversized sweater of Caleb's, sleeves hanging past her hands. Despite the stress etched into her features, there was a gentle beauty in her movements, careful, motherly, resilient. Caleb found himself watching her more than he intended, not with desire. He wasn't ready for that, maybe would never be, but with a sense of awe at how a person so beaten down by life could still rise every morning and fight for her children. On the 3rd day of the storm, a faint engine noise rattled through the white void outside. Coda's ears shot up and he trotted to the window, tail stiff, body tense. Hannah stiffened instantly, clutching Lily to her chest. Caleb moved toward the door and grabbed his coat. "Stay in here," he said, his voice low, controlled. Clara grabbed his sleeve, her eyes wide. "Is it the bad man?" "I'll find out," Caleb answered, gently, freeing his arm. He stepped outside into the blinding swirl of snow. A sheriff's truck emerged from the white haze, its lights dimmed by thick snowfall, but unmistakable in their slow, methodical approach. Caleb exhaled. It wasn't Victor. Not yet. Sheriff Elias Dalton stepped out of the vehicle, his boots sinking deep into the powder. He was a tall man in his early 50s with broad shoulders and a rugged face lined by decades of cold winds and difficult decisions. His salt and pepper beard framed a mouth that rarely smiled, but his pale blue eyes carried a level-headed steadiness that made people trust him instantly. Dalton was the kind of man who'd grown up in Montana, shaped by its storms as much as its open plenty. He wore a thick brown sheriff's jacket, hat dusted, with snow, and leather gloves creased from long use. "Caleb," he greeted, voice gruff, but warm. "Heard. You've got company." "You heard right," Caleb replied. Dalton stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I hate to bring trouble in a storm like this, but you need to know someone's looking for the woman and her kids." Caleb's shoulders tightened. "Victor?" "Yeah, he's in the county now. Went straight to the courthouse, waving papers from Kansas. Claims she fled with property that ain't hers." He looked Caleb straight in the eye. "He's accusing her of kidnapping the girls." A coldness far deeper than the storm settled in Caleb's chest. "That man is lying." "I figured as much," Dalton said. "But he's got signatures and filings. It's messy. Kansas and Montana law don't mix cleanly." He scratched his beard. "I came to warn you. He's not allowed up here in this weather, but once the road's open," Dalton didn't finish. "He didn't need to." Caleb nodded once. "Thanks." Dalton lowered his gaze, sensing Caleb's tension. "I'll do what I can to slow things down, but prepare yourself." When the sheriff left, the snowfall swallowed his truck almost instantly. Inside the cabin, Hannah was already trembling. Lily whimpered against her chest while Maggie hid behind Coda, clutching his fur in tiny fists. Clara stood tall, but her lips quivered. "Is it him?" she whispered. "Is the bad man coming?" Caleb knelt before her, his hands steady on her small shoulders. "Not yet, and he won't get past me. I promise." Clara's voice cracked. "But what if he takes Maggie or Lily or Mama?" Caleb's heart twisted. He saw in that single, trembling moment the depth of the burdens Clara had been forced to carry, fear of losing the family she had fought to protect. He took a slow breath, letting his voice drop into the tone he once used with frightened civilians overseas. "Look at me," he said gently. Clara lifted her eyes, fearful, hopeful. "I won't let anyone take your family away," Caleb said with marine certainty. Not today. Not ever. A tear slid down her cheek. Then another. She threw her arms around him, burying her face into his jacket. Caleb held her carefully, as if she were made of glass. Hannah watched with a hand over her mouth, tears pooling in her eyes. Behind them, Coda stepped forward, standing tall and rigid, positioning himself between the door and the children. His chest rumbled with a low, protective growl, not of threat, but of warning. He was ready. They all were. But outside, the storm only grew deeper, thicker, heavier. The kind of storm that hid footsteps, hid intentions, hid men who traveled with anger in their hearts. And Caleb knew one thing with absolute certainty. Victor was coming. The storm began to ease on the 6th morning, thinning from a blinding wall of white into scattered flurries drifting lazily across the mountains. Light finally broke through the cloud cover, painting the snow with a soft, deceptive calm. But inside the cabin, calm was the last thing on anyone's mind. Caleb had barely slept. He had spent the night sitting in the armchair near the stove, listening to every small creak of the cabin, every shift of the wind. Coda slept by the door, body taut even in rest, as though ready to spring up at the slightest threat. It wasn't the storm that had kept Caleb awake. It was the thought of the man hunting Hannah and her daughters. Victor, a man who had already taken everything from her and seemed determined to take more. By morning, Hannah moved quietly around the kitchen, her face pale but composed. Lily rested against her shoulder, drifting in and out of sleep. Clara stood near the table with determined stillness, while Maggie sat on the floor brushing Coda's fur with a wooden spoon, convinced it was a real brush. Coda tolerated the grooming with the somber dignity of a soldier who had accepted strange missions before. Caleb watched them, these fragile souls who had stumbled into his life, and something old and buried stirred inside him, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since his family died. He returned from the generator shed just as Sheriff Dalton's truck rolled up the driveway, tires crunching through the packed snow. Dalton stepped out, brushing frost from his brown jacket. His face said everything. Caleb stiffened. "It's bad, isn't it?" Dalton's expression softened with reluctant sympathy. "Kansas court filings came through. They're not in your favor, Caleb. Legally, Hannah has no standing to keep the children away from the uncle if a judge interprets Daniel's estate paperwork a certain way." Hannah's breath hitched behind Caleb, a sharp wounded sound. Clara grabbed her hand immediately. Maggie hid behind Coda, who stood taller, chest expanding with a warning rumble. Dalton continued, his voice low. "I'm not saying Victor should get custody. I'm saying he has paperwork that might convince a judge to temporarily remove the girls until the case is sorted." "No," Hannah whispered, clutching Lily so tight the baby whimpered. Caleb's jaw tightened. Every instinct inside him, the Marine, the man who had lost his own children, the protector who had carried both brothers and strangers through war, rose up like a wall of steel. Dalton lowered his voice further. "You have one option to stop him." One. Caleb already knew. He felt the weight of it in the cold morning air. Dalton confirmed it. If Hannah were married to someone stable with property, income, a clean record, preferably a veteran that would override Victor's claim instantly, Montana court would recognize the family unit as protected. Hannah stared at Caleb, shock widening her hazel eyes. Dalton gave a subtle nod toward her. "It doesn't have to be romantic, just legal, and it has to happen fast." He left them alone after that, driving away with a heavy sigh, as if he hated the burden he'd placed on them. Inside, silence settled thick as the snow outside. Caleb turned to Hannah. She looked overwhelmed, her face pale, her breath uneven, but she didn't look away. She held Lily close. Arrogance. His eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the room with a sense of entitlement. Two men flanked him, both wearing heavy leather jackets and scowls. "That's enough," Victor shouted. "This wedding is illegal. She's kidnapping those children, and this man is helping her." Hannah flinched, pulling Lily close. Clara grabbed Maggie's hand. Coda stepped forward, hackles rising, a low growl vibrating. Through the pews, Sheriff Dalton didn't hesitate. He placed a firm hand on his holster, stepping between Victor and the family. "You're out of line, Victor. This is a lawful ceremony. That woman stole my brother's kids." "No," Hannah said suddenly, standing straighter than she had in weeks. "I protected them from you." Victor's face twisted. Hannah stepped forward, her voice shaking but strong. "You stole everything from us. You took the house, the land, the savings. You told me I didn't deserve to raise my daughters. But Daniel entrusted me with them, and I will not let you undo that. Whispers rose among the town's people who had come to witness the small ceremony. Victor's arrogance faltered under their scrutiny. Pastor Whitman cleared his throat gently. Shall we continue? Victor lunged forward, but Dalton grabbed him, twisting his arm behind his back with the precision of a man who had done this too many times. You're done here, Dalton said coldly. The townspeople murmured, voices rising in disapproval, forcing Victor and his men backward until they retreated out the front door, humiliated, outnumbered, outmatched. With the doors closed again, warmth returned to the church. Pastor Whitman smiled kindly. Shall we finish what we started? And there, in front of the modest Christmas altar, Caleb and Hannah were pronounced husband and wife. Clara held Maggie's hand. Lily giggled softly in her mother's arms, and Coda let out a single gentle howl, a sound that rose through the church rafters like a blessing. A new family had been born. Snow drifted softly through the pines as evening wrapped itself around the mountains. The kind of gentle winter hush that made the world feel momentarily forgiven. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a landscape sculpted in white, glittering like powdered diamonds under the rising moon. Inside Caleb's cabin, however, the warmth was not just from the stove or the candles. It radiated from the people who now filled the once quiet space. The cabin glowed, truly glowed, not from electricity, not from lanterns, but from something alive within its walls. Laughter, soft voices, the rhythmic patter of small footsteps, the faint, contented sigh of a baby drifting to sleep, and the slow, steady thump of Coda's tail as he lay beside the fire, his amber fur catching the orange light like strands of molten copper. For the first time in years, Caleb Hawkins felt the weight inside his chest loosen, not disappear, but shift, making room for something else. Hope. The dinner table, once set for one, now held places for 5 and an extra dish on the floor for Coda. The mismatched plates looked almost festive under the warm light. Hannah had done her best with the ingredients available, preparing a simple stew with vegetables and shredded venison Caleb had stored in the freezer. It wasn't extravagant, but the smell alone filled the cabin with comfort. Clara sat straight back in her chair, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her hair had been brushed until it shone, and her cheeks were rosy from playing earlier in the snow outside with Caleb. Maggie sat to her left, swinging her legs beneath her seat, humming to herself while sneaking glances at Coda, who pretended not to notice her attempts to drop bits of bread near his paw. Lily sat on Hannah's lap, her dark curls bouncing as she babbled happily, occasionally slapping her tiny palms on the table with excitement. Caleb took his seat last, glancing around the table with a sense of awe he didn't try to hide. This was no longer a cabin. It was a home, and somehow, impossibly, he was part of it. When everyone had served themselves, Hannah smiled softly. Before we eat, since tonight is Christmas Eve, I'd like us all to say what we're thankful for. Caleb had never been one to participate in holiday rituals. After losing his family, Christmas had become a date he simply endured. But tonight, as Hannah looked at him with gentle encouragement, he felt something stir, an openness he thought he had buried forever. Clara went first. She sat taller, clearing her throat seriously. I'm thankful, she said, voice small but steady, that we don't have to sleep in the cold anymore, and that my sisters are safe, and that Mama doesn't cry at night now. She blinked quickly as if embarrassed by her own honesty. I'm also thankful for hot food. And Coda thumped his tail twice in acknowledgement. Maggie clapped her hands. My turn. I'm thankful because let me hug him. All day. She threw her arms around the dog's neck and Coda accepted the gesture with stoic resignation, closing his eyes as if to say he had given up resisting love. Lily, seeing the attention turned toward her, squealed happily and smacked both hands against the table. Caleb smiled. I think that means she's thankful too. Hannah stroked Lily's hair, then met Caleb's eyes. I'm thankful for the man who opened his door to strangers in a storm, and for the fact that he didn't just save us, he saw us. Her voice cracked slightly, but she steadied herself. He gave us a chance to breathe again. Caleb felt the words settle deep within him, touching a place he hadn't let anyone near since losing Ella Laner and the boys. It wasn't romantic, not yet. It was gratitude, raw and fragile, and somehow more powerful. When it was his turn, he took a slow breath. "I'm thankful," he began, "for a sound I thought I'd never hear again." Hannah tilted her head. "Which sound?" "The knock at my door," he said quietly. "The one that saved both sides of it." Silence settled briefly, warm, full, meaningful. After dinner, Caleb rose from the table and walked toward the small wooden box he kept on the mantel. It was carved with intricate patterns, an heirloom passed down from his grandfather containing the few precious things he still carried from his life before tragedy. He rested his palm on the lid for a moment, gathering courage. Hannah watched, puzzled but patient. When Caleb opened the box, there were only 2 items inside. A small gold ring with an engraving on the inside. Eleanor, his late wife's wedding band, and a heavier silver ring worn and scratched once belonging to Daniel, Hannah's husband, a ring Caleb had picked up from the church after the ceremony when Pastor Whitman gently handed it to him, saying, "Maybe you should hold this. It might mean something someday." Now it meant everything. Caleb lifted Eleanor's ring first. It gleamed softly in the firelight as though acknowledging the moment. Then he reached for Daniel's ring and slid it onto his own finger. The metal was cool against his skin. Hannah rose slowly, Lily still in her arms. "Caleb, what are you doing?" He approached her with a reverence he hadn't felt in years. "These belong to our pasts," he said. "One yours, one mine. They were once symbols of families that existed, families that were loved." He paused, emotion thickening his voice. "But now they can remind us that our pasts made room for this new beginning." He took Hannah's hand gently and placed Eleanor's ring into her palm. "This is yours now if you want it." Hannah stared at it, her breath catching as tears filled her eyes. "Caleb, are you sure? This is a reminder," he whispered. "That once, then lay by the children," his watchful eyes softening as he finally rested his head on his paws. Outside, snowflakes drifted peacefully. Inside, wrapped in warmth and the soft breaths of sleeping children, a new family settled into their first Christmas night together. A family forged not by blood, but by choice, by courage, and by the quiet knock on a lonely Marine's door. And for the first time, in a very long time, Caleb Hawkins slept without nightmares. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't arrive with thunder, angels, or trumpets from the heavens. Sometimes they begin with nothing more than a knock at the door, a stranger's kindness, or the courage to open your heart one more time. In moments when life feels cold and unforgiving, we are reminded that God's grace often works quietly through people placed in our path at exactly the right moment. As you go back to your own daily life, may this story remind you that hope can still be found in the middle of storms, that love can rise again after loss, and that God has a way of stitching broken pieces into something whole and new. If this story touched your heart, please share it so others can feel its warmth. Leave a comment to tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to join our growing family of listeners around the world. May God bless you, protect your home, and surround you and your loved ones with His peace and His